Hey there, I'm Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and this is the Bonsai Stuff Podcast. I've had a great week. Seriously, I love it. Spring's here, finally. Whew. Winter's gone. Calendar dates ticked over. Walked outside this morning and there was that lovely warmth in the air, and even though it's cloudy and still been wet overnight, that's fine, I don't mind. But everything's growing. You look around, the grass is growing, the flowers in the garden are growing, and everything just looks great. So that was a nice way to start the day. Plus, also this week I got to get a copy of an article that I'd written for New Zealand, a New Zealand Bonsai magazine. I received that in the mail this week. That was great to see. First article published. Love it. Got to visit a wholesale nursery as well. I was kindly invited up there, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the podcast, and got to see a different side of things, which I'm going to look to incorporate over time into my practices in a way. And I also only have a few days left of repotting, which is fantastic because I'm done with it now. I'm sore, I'm tired, and I just want to move on to the next phase. I love it. I love when repotting gets here, but as I say, I love it when it goes away. As anyone who's repotted, plus of 300 large trees in a couple of months would say. So I'm looking forward to what spring brings. The pinching started, and in this episode of the podcast, I want to cover off on a review of candle breaking in pines. It's that time of year. Put a post up on Instagram the other day. It's created a few comments and a bit of intrigue as well, so it's probably worth reviewing that. I've talked about it before, but it's possibly worth going over again as to why I do it and the benefits from it that I see, and then you make your own mind up after that. And I want to talk also about decision making. Spring is a great time for growth, but it's also one of those times where we can get you can suffer from decision paralysis, where possibly you get stuck. And I want to just talk about a method that I use to get through and to make decisions. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Plus, I'll also want to talk about perspective when you're working on trees. Talked about perspective before, but it's really important just to reiterate what that means and how we can use it and how you should use it when you're pruning your bonsai at this time of year. So without any further ado, let's get in the podcast. All right, let's kick this off with spring candle breaking on pines and what it is, what it isn't. And I just want to start by saying that with pines, your overall objective is balancing areas of strength. So if you've got strong areas, you want them to not take over and pull resources from the weaker areas, and you want weaker areas to get stronger. So that's the basic premise I want you to think about when I talk about candle breaking. And it's ultimately used on trees that have got these big differentials or areas of strength which need to be turned down. You need to stop resources going to these areas and have them pushed down to the weaker areas. So spring candle breaking is one of these ones that gets used on trees while they're in that development phase. And it's used less and less as we get to refinement, because in the refined trees, what you'll find is the candles become evenly distributed over the tree. So the length, and what I'm talking about is the length of the candles and the thickness and the overall viability of those candles that push in early spring. They start to balance out, which is exactly what we want. I went to one of the trips when I went to Japan. I talked to them. I said, now spring candle breaking, what do you guys do? And they're like, what do you mean, what do we do? And I said, well, do you go around and you break all these? And they go, why would you do that? And I said, because you're trying to balance the strength, push it from the strong down to the weak. And they're like, look at the trees. They're all balanced. Like the trees that we've got here. So they're a nursery that was working at the high end where the trees are all developed. But that's not what I do, and that's not what the majority of people in Australia are at with a lot of their trees, a lot of their pines. So I've I like spring candle breaking, and I use it definitely on my trees that are growing and developing and becoming that refined tree. I use it less and less on my refined trees. That's a given. But what I do with it is, so the spring candle starts to push, right, and the tree funnels resources to areas that it believes are going to grow the strongest. And it's going to achieve the tree's objective to get as big as it can, as tall as it can, and as strong as it can in that area to grow, to photosynthesize, to harness the sun's energy, right? It doesn't matter that the lower branches look pretty or are probably the most important parts of the bonsai as far as we're concerned as bonsai practitioners. All it cares about is achieving this objective, right? So it stops wasting resources on smaller buds, smaller candles, and pushes it all to stronger ones. And they're generally, and this is a very broad generalization, but they're generally around the apex of your pines, right? So this time of the year, what happens is those little buds start to push. They're very white and they've got like hair all over them. Then they start to elongate, start to get longer, and they'll start to develop little dimples over them. And those dimples are the future needles that are starting to grow in that candle. And then eventually what will happen is it'll reach its maximum height. Then those needles will start to pop out and it'll start to open with a bud at the very tip, right? And someone said to me the other day, what's the point in breaking the candle if you're just going to decandle it anyway? And that's true. That will be decandled. But what I want is the resources that are going to that candle and making it longer to be pushed down to the next strongest candles. And then they'll start to get long. I'll break them off and then I'll start pushing further and further down the tree to the weaker areas of the tree. So the process with it is, to make it really clear, your candle will start with like a green stem at the base and then it will start to get needles. You want to break it when those dimples start to appear. So past the hairy stage, past the white closed stage, when you see the dimples, that's the right time to break it. But it's too late if those needles have started to push out. It's not going to have any benefit whatsoever. So the idea with it is that you need to be out there every day walking around your pines, and as soon as you see one start to push away, it can grow quite rapidly. It can grow centimetres in a day. They're the ones that as it starts to get those dimples around the side, the process is just use your fingers, not scissors, because if you use scissors, you're going to be cutting through those needles. So you just use your fingers, grab the tip of it and tilt it to the side. And I've got videos on YouTube explaining it. So if you want to dig in further to the process, then jump on YouTube and have a look for it. But it's really simple. You just break it with your fingers and it stops further resources going to that candle, right? So it stops it from pushing any further and getting any stronger and starts to redistribute those resources further down to other buds on the tree. And that's the whole purpose of spring candle breaking. Yep, sure, I am going to go in and I'm going to decandle that one later on, but I'm trying to get the resource at this time of the year. It's about harnessing the strength of spring and pushing it evenly around the tree so I can suddenly get the scales into balance. The strong areas, candle break, makes them a little bit weaker. Pushes resources to the weak areas, makes them stronger, and suddenly the strong and the weak suddenly come into equilibrium, and I've got a more balanced pine tree, a more balanced bonsai. And it's not something which will happen with one sitting. It happens over years and years and years of constantly doing this so those weaker areas get stronger. And spring candle breaking is only one of the techniques that we can use. The other is, needle density. Stronger areas have lesser needles than the weaker areas. So that way you're pushing more resources with more needles to those weaker areas that generally the lower branches have more needles on them than the upper area. As the tree becomes more and more balanced, that balancing of the needles from strong to weak areas becomes more and more similar, because the tree's in balance. And then if you find one branch starts to get weaker, you leave more needles in that area, you let the candles grow a little bit longer, you push more resources to that area, suddenly brings the strength of that branch up again. Then you go back to balancing things out across the system. So it's not that it's something that's a waste of your time. It's definitely one of the great techniques you can use for a pine in development, and it's a really simple process. It's not what I'd consider a job. You walk around, or I walk around with my cuppa in the morning, and I have a look and go, yep, bang, bang, bang. It might be 2 or 3 each tree that I go past on the development stage per day, and then all of a sudden it starts to balance itself out, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. So it's not that I'm bringing the tree into my workshop to do it. I'm simply doing it on the fly as I go. It's not major, and it's not an inconvenience. It's definitely something that you need to be doing. From my point of view, from my opinion, and what I've done with all of my pines, it's a task that you do every spring, especially early spring, and you've got to be on the ball, because if those needles start to open up and start to push and you miss the window for it, then really, it's a sort of a waste of time. Where I want to cover off also where you don't do the spring candle breaking is on sacrifice branches or areas that you want to thicken. Right, so if you've got a sacrifice branch around the way, don't go candle break it, because it's going to stop the lengthening of that branch, which will then therefore stop the thickening. You're only doing it on areas that you don't want to get any stronger, which is normally around the apex of the tree, so you can push resources further down. It's a really simple process. I use it on all of my pines, whether it's radiata, Scots, Mugos, or white pines, whatever it is. Then I'll take that tip out to push resources further down the tree as well. Decandling only occurs, I'll reiterate, only occurs on the black pines, doesn't occur on any of the other pines. They definitely have a different process, but this is just the spring candle breaking that I want to talk about, because it's been raised as something that should be talked about. Spring brings around fantastic opportunities for us, and it's an exciting time. I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's really, you get one crack to harness the spring burst that comes out, and you can sometimes at this time of year, or over the next period, as things sort of start to push and start to grow, you can suffer from decision paralysis. I see it all the time where it's not that you sort of, maybe it's confidence, I'm not sure, but it's you always want to do the best thing by your bonsai. You always want to do the right thing, and you always want to take a step in the right direction. And it's the fear of doing the wrong thing that can often stop you from getting your scissors out of your branch cutters and making a decision. Oh, no, it happens to everybody, it happens to me. And anyone that says that doesn't happen to them, that fear of making the wrong decision, well, I reckon they're maybe not telling the truth. I use the example of when you see a demonstrator on stage, and they look at a tree and they get up there and they get their branch cutters out, and it's a shrub, and then bang, 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 a couple of cuts later, the thing starts to look like a bonsai. You go, oh my God, how did you get to that point? And it takes a lot, but it's also a lot of experience that can get to that point. And I don't think that's what you should aim for. I think as a practitioner, there's a really simple process that I use that allows you to pretty much get to the end result that you want, but it's flipping it on its head. So rather than looking at an area going, okay, there's 5, 6 branches coming from this one point, and looking at it going, okay, so of the 5 or 6, I'm going to keep that one and that one, cut the rest off. The approach that I use is to use the most wrong. All right, so pick the branch in that, of that 5 or 6. Don't look at keeping which ones you're going to keep. Just flip it on its head and look at which ones you're going to get rid of, because they're growing wrong. There might be that they're growing down, might be that they're growing backwards, might be that they're growing straight up in the air. It could be that they're growing across another branch, whatever it is. And just look at it and go, rather than going, okay, I've got 5 or 6 things there, I've got to get back to 2. Just look at it and go, what's the first thing I cut off? And start with that. All right. And then draw a breath, have a look at it and go, okay, now what's the next most wrong branch in that area? and look at it and go, okay, well, there's sort of the 4 that are left. All right, so there's probably 3 that generally are going to be about right, but there should be one that's maybe growing at a right angle, or it's not quite right. You look at it and go, you're a good branch, but there's better available. So of the 4 that are there, the most wrong, and it doesn't necessarily have to be glaringly obvious that it's not right, it's not perfect, but it's not the best of the bunch that you've got. Cut that one off. So then you're down to 3. And of the 3 that are left, I've generally found that this is where it gets the hardest, where you go, well, but they're all pretty good. Yeah, they are. And they always will be. Every time you look at those 3 branches, there's always a justification that you can use that will say, okay, I should keep all 3 because they're all pretty good. And, if it comes down to flipping a coin saying, well, all right, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, you're the one that goes, then so be it. You've got to you should get back to 2 things coming from any one spot, because you'll get a swelling, you'll get a knuckle that'll look ugly, and it won't be the right thing to do. But always use that approach that you can keep any of the 3 that are left, and that's generally the way that I find that it works. The last card that I pull out of the deck that says to me which one I should cut or which one I shouldn't, I think about it from a perspective of wiring. Which ones will I have to wire least? If you've got one that you think, yeah, that's a beautiful branch, that's growing really nicely, but I'm going to have to put wire on that and drag that around and do this with it. But then you look at the other 2 and go, well, they're sort of growing in the right direction. That's the last piece of the puzzle that I use to say, well, I'd prefer not to wire this and have it sort of grow in the direction that I want. Maybe it needs a bit of subtle wiring to help it along and make it perfect in whoever's eyes is looking at it. But it's generally that will I need to wire this branch if I keep it is the last thing that I think of before I get my branch cutters or scissors out and go, yep, you're gone. You're out of there. So what I'm trying to get to is it's difficult for everybody. It is one of those things that you need to practice and you need to do over and over and over again before you can build up the confidence to look at a bunch of branches and go, yep, keep, cut the rest off. That's all I need. But you don't need to necessarily get to that point. The worst thing that you can possibly do, and I've talked about this, I don't know how many times over the last 5 years on the podcast, the very worst thing that you can do is nothing. Because if you do nothing, it's not going to fix the problem, and that problem's going to magnify out. In the next podcast, I'm going to talk about internodes and the importance of internodes. And so if you've got branches that are starting to push, starting to lengthen, you've got knuckles starting to form on the tree where there's all these branches coming from one location. You've got the internode length starting to push away as well. Really, the ultimate that you're going to have to perform somewhere down the track, or when you sit in front of someone like myself and say, I'm not sure what to do, I just left it. What do you do? It's like, okay, well, that point that you were looking at making the decision on, those 5 branches, it's now too late. We now need to go back further because you've got that swelling there and we can't do anything about it. So instead of taking steps forward with your bonsai, you're actually going to go backwards. So instead of 1 to 2 continuing on to 4 to becoming 8 branches over time, it's suddenly you've gone 2 becomes 20 because you've got a knuckle of growth, and it comes back to the original 2 that you've got, and the branch gets shortened again. So you're doing something and being not 100% right is brilliant, and pat yourself on the back for doing it. And don't ever think that when like I have a lot of people come through workshops and they're like, oh, I've done this, I think it's wrong. I will never look at it and go, that's shocking. Really, I can see there's a stub here. That would have been a lot better branch to keep. It's like, I applaud people for making that decision because it is tough. And years of practice and years of training and years of repetitively doing the same thing over and over every time I work on branches, it does get easier. But I know from looking at your collection, at your trees that you've got, it can be one of those things where you're like, what do I do? Where do I start? And the best advice I can give absolutely everyone that listens to the podcast is, 1, don't be hard on yourself. Look to get back to 2 things coming from any one spot. That's the ideal. And start with what's most wrong. That's the best advice I can give you. Remove the rubbish and start working your way forward. And when it gets to, flip a coin, flip that coin. Don't look back. Once you've cut something off, I've got a general rule in my workshop that once something's cut off, you put it into the green bin and you move on. You forget about it, because there's no way you're going to put the bloody thing back on. And you shouldn't think like that. You should always be thinking forward, planning with your trees and what's the next step and what's the next step. And those next steps only occur from what you've got in front of you. I was talking with a mate the other night, and he's like, I remember that tree we talked about, how we really wanted a bud to come out, and then all of a sudden that bud appeared there. It's like, yep. He said, well, now that bud's shot off. It's like, that is awesome. That is brilliant, because that's step forward with the plan that you've got. But if that bud had never appeared, then you've still got to keep going forward. You can't, you come up with a plan of, how do I get something to grow in that area, or you redesign the tree. But just keep taking those forward steps. Don't get stuck not making decisions, because no decision is the absolute worst thing you can do. And turning your back on the tree, going, well, I'm just going to let it grow this year. That's not what bonsai is about either, because you'll end up having to take those massive steps backwards, and it's not going to be good for you. Your confidence, you'll look at it and go, well, I don't know what to do. Do something, seriously, and just work with the wrong. Start taking those steps forward in the right direction. So the next part that I want to talk about, which links very strongly to that decision paralysis, that pruning process that we're about to go through with this spring growth and continuing your plan forward, something that I've talked about before, perspective, and that it can relate to a lot of things. But this specifically that I want to talk about with perspective now is the pruning process, and that links with your decision making and removal of the most incorrect. I work on the lifters, the hydraulic lifters, and I've got turntables on there, and they can go to different heights, and that is great for perspective. I was working on a tree the other day, a Japanese maple of mine that I just love, and I was pinching and I was pruning back some longer stuff. As the tree wakes up, I'm giving it one final haircut to get it going for spring. And I was working through it, and as I was doing it, I found myself standing, sitting, raising the platform, lowering the platform, turning it around, bending down, looking at it from different angles, different perspective. And that's why I thought, so I grabbed out my notebook on the podcast. I went, that's a really important thing to talk to people about, because, it's perspective when you're working on your trees makes a really big difference. If you're, and this is where, I've talked about before, where you take photos of your trees, you look and you go, hang on a minute, I didn't notice that. Where's that branch coming from? And then you suddenly get your head to a different angle and go, oh, there it is. And it doesn't look quite as nice as what you'd pictured in your head. And this is where, when you work from a certain angle or a certain height, a certain perspective, you see the tree a certain way, and then when you take a photo of it, you see it from a different perspective. And that's, the videos are great. I love the videos for my own personal use, to look at things and go, well, hang on, stop, that part there is out of whack. Something's not right in that area. And it's actually a really positive tool that I use, and I encourage you to look at it from that way as well. But when you're pruning your trees and you get to that, which one should I keep, perspective can have a massive part to play with it as well. I was looking at branches that had sort of grown out, that I wanted to cut back to the first pair of leaves, first pair of buds, the first internode. And as I was doing it, it's like, oh, well, this could grow here and that could grow there. And then I'd suddenly spin the tree around and go, oh, no, that's no good. That whole thing's got to come off, because ultimately it's going to do this. And the perspective, if you just sit in one static position, I don't think that you're going to make the best decision you possibly could. As I said, making any decision is great. So don't take this as, oh, I'm not in the right perspective, I shouldn't make the decision. Whatever, just cut. But I think that if you can change your perspective as you're working on your trees, regardless whether it's pruning, pinching, needle plucking, wiring, whatever it is, I think that you'll come up with a far better overall design of your tree, and it'll be more rounded. Like one of the best things you can do, and one of the bonsai clubs had it where at one of the bonsai shows, instead of having trees on a flat bench with backdrops where you can only see it from one perspective, you sort of get a bit of the side, but mainly it's the front. That's how it's all designed. They had them on podiums, so you could actually walk around the trees and see them from all angles, which I think is far more beneficial to anyone that wants to get a good grasp of how somebody develops their trees. And if you look at a tree and you're taken by it, walk around it, have a look. Because you're never designing things from that one perspective from the front of the tree, or you shouldn't. It should be designed as a three-dimensional image. And I'd sort of love it if there was a bonsai display where it had a tree on a rotisserie, just going round and round and round, because that way everyone could take it in and appreciate it. That there's a hell of a lot of work that goes into it. But also from a horticultural point of view, having branches evenly spaced around the tree is far better than having them stacked one on top of the other and being that flat 2D image just to be viewed from the front. So your perspective, spinning the tree around on the turntable, I love those turntables because I look for areas of thickness, and one of the things that when you're stuck in a certain perspective or from one viewing angle, I definitely don't see those thicker areas. And so if I sit there and I sort of spin the tree around a couple of times, I'll go, wow, look at that one. That one's way too thick for that area, because everything else around it is a lighter, it's normally around the apex that I do it, especially, and I'll look for any thick, coarse branching, anything that's got, at this time of year, before bud burst, anything that's buds have swollen significantly compared to the rest of the tree. I find that area is going to grow far too strong, so I'll remove it. I'll get rid of it before it becomes an issue and starts thickening and making junctions too coarse or whatever. I'll look at getting rid of that. And it's that spinning of the tree and looking at it from different angles that allows me to take in that view and make the decisions far easier than if I'm just looking at it from one single angle. So this week I was really fortunate to be contacted by someone I've met before, but reached out to me, Nick, who is a listener to the podcast. So g'day, Nick. And he invited me a while ago to come up to his wholesale nursery up in Monbulk, so up in the hills in Victoria, Australia, and it's fantastic, honestly. And it had sort of slipped past me, and he sort of reached out again, and yep, we got in contact, and I headed up there, and I can honestly tell you that it's probably one of the highlights for me to get into the back end of a wholesale nursery and see how things are mass produced and the quality that they've got and the infrastructure that they've got. You talk about shade covers, seeing what these guys have got in a commercial sense with motorized covers and whatever, it sort of makes my eyes light up like it's Christmas, seeing what they've got, their hothouses and all the automatic infrastructure, the heated grow beds with hydronic heating under them. It was a really special trip, and I loved it. So thank you, Nick, for that, for the invite. But a couple of things that I picked up while I was there, which I'm going to explore because I was really taken by it, was some natural pest controls, which was probably one of the primary reasons for Nick reaching out to me in the first place, and to see how they do it in a commercial sense, because if you can do it with hundreds of thousands of trees, and it's something that can be managed and replicated, then it's definitely something worth considering. So it was really interesting to get the insight on how they make it work and what's involved with it, and costs and timeframes and all that sort of stuff, and what else is needed around the place. So that's definitely something that I'm going to explore in my own yard. My concerns with it were, being trees where the foliage is so dense and tight, and how they're looked after, whether it would be different to something in a commercial environment. But I think it's it's something that that can definitely be explored and be pursued. And like I've said in many times before, that I think if you get to the point where you stop learning, then you may as well stop doing bonsai. I think there's always things that all of us can take on board and can develop, and I think that maybe this might be something that that I'll definitely explore and see whether it's far more viable than using chemical sprays, and that's it. I'm while I'm doing the testing phase, it'll be something which is split between spraying and non-spraying areas of the yard, just to get a grasp on it, make sure that things are okay. Always that testing phase to make sure everything's going to be okay, and then sort of look to replicate and produce. Reliability, predictability. It's all part of the ethos of what I do with my trees and my yard, and pest and disease management is definitely up there. It's got to be reliable. It's got to be predictable. It's got to be repeatable. So yeah, that was awesome, and also seeing grafting in action too, with which was pretty cool, and all the different varieties of pine that are being used, and the reason why they're being used and grown, and how they can. I was thinking, my head was going a million miles an hour, seeing how it could work from a bonsai perspective, and it was actually the best part was I got to come home with a tray of future bonsai, which I'm dead excited about. I haven't been that excited about starting bonsai from scratch for a very long time. So I really appreciate the inspiration and the kick along to start from a zero base point again to see what I can do. It's I love that. I love having trees that are in the refinement stage, that are beautiful, that are pieces of art, but the thought of starting something which is going to be a nice tree in sort of 50 years has sort of dwindled back from me a little bit, and now seeing, because I do enjoy it when I get into a workshop and I see it from someone else's eyes, and I sort of help take those first steps. I find that really exciting. Those initial steps that someone takes of taking a piece of stock and turning it into a bonsai. I love it. It's so exciting. It's so exciting. But for me, I'd always thought, my benches are pretty full, and you really don't want to start taking cuttings again. But who knows? I think this, grabbing these 20 odd, future pine bonsais of all different varieties with different, genetics. I think that and that's talking about genetics. Actually, it's I was asked a question on Instagram a little while ago, which I haven't forgotten about. I've put into my memory bank about the selection process. Should we be choosing trees with certain genetics to build bonsai? And that is something I want to talk about next week, because it's almost a whole my thought process on it's almost a whole episode in itself, and so I'll dig into that. But seeing what these guys were doing up at this nursery in Monbulk, it sort of pushed that along, that thought process for me as well, thinking, well, these guys are taking a nice base stock, grafting it, and doing some really cool stuff with how they graft as well, and the position of the graft, so you're not getting that ugly union, and you're getting stock which is sort of compatible with the base to grow out, so you're not going to get this some grafts that I've got. I've got this one particular tree in mind, a white pine that's grafted onto a black pine. It's quite an old graft, and it's got if you look at the graft below the graft, I wish I had that on a black pine, to be honest. It's magic. It's like it's sort of 30 centimetres across, beautiful taper on it, lovely bark, exceptional. It gets to the graft union where the white pine's put in there, and it looks like someone's put a broomstick in there straight into it. So the graft below the graft is far better than above the graft, and unfortunately that's pretty much the way it's going to be for my lifetime. Anyway, I still like it. I still enjoy the white pine that's above it, and I'm still putting my back into making it a beautiful tree. But grafts have always been something that have sort of eluded me from how they can detract from trees. I don't mind them on cedars. I think the cedars sort of develop quite nicely, but the techniques that these guys were using with their grafting, it's and they're doing this cut above, when they remove the original tree and leave the graft, sort of the way it grows over time is looking very, very natural, and it's really positive, really, really positive. So that was like I said, it was an absolute highlight of my my time doing bonsai, getting to the back end and seeing, how they have these semi-automatic potting machines to punch out the up-potting of trees in a commercial environment. It's not the sort of thing that I think our bonsai will ever get to. I think we're far more refined than that. But like I said, from a pure interest point of view, a horticultural point of view, it was great. It was awesome. So thank you very much again for the invite up there. So it's been a good week. So before I start the wrap-up of the podcast, I just want to say a big thank you to the subscribers. There's more people jumping on board, which is lovely. It's so nice, and it's greatly appreciated. I know I'd say that, but I don't say it lightly. It means a lot to me, and I'm really really taken by it. So thank you for your support and confidence in me, and it sort of inspires me to keep pushing on and putting as much as I've got into this podcast, because it's taken seriously, and it's not just something to fill in your day when you're driving to work. It's a lot of people. I've got a brilliant message the other day about how it's changed their bonsai life, and their trees have come on tenfold, and yeah, I love it. That sort of stuff really pumps my tires up and makes me feel good too. As I said, I'm a great believer. There's two ways you can do things in life, and this doesn't just apply to bonsai. It's you can either knock some people down and use other people's bodies to climb up yourself and make yourself look better, or you can be the one that lifts everyone else up, and we all get better together. And that's definitely the approach that I've got in every single facet of my life, and especially with bonsai, because it's one of those frail things I see that, because there's so many different angles to bonsai and so many different reasons that we all do it, and to just lump it all in as, it's an art, or no, it's all horticultural, or it's all, just my weekend pastime. I think that's unfair, and to look at it from a certain perspective and say that it, you need to achieve the highest level of your art form can really be isolating, and can push people away. And maybe that's what some people want. Maybe that's what some of the boffins around the world want. They want to keep it exclusive and unachievable and that godlike, but it's not like that for me. I think it's something that we can all do, and we can all get to our ultimate. What our ultimate is individual. It's whether it's achieving the best bonsai in the world, like I'd love to do, or whether it's just being successfully keeping your trees alive through summer, or having a bud pop at the position that you want, or growing a forest, whatever it is. It doesn't matter, but it's individual. And I think to look at it from any other perspective, and to belittle or to push down from any other angle is the most wrong thing you can do. And if you were doing it and you were a branch on my bonsai, I'd get rid of you. So I think just keep going the way we're going. You Bonsai Stuff podcast listeners, you're an awesome bunch. I love you all, seriously, and it really means a lot, the reach outs that happen. So thank you for the subscribers, and thank you to everyone that listens to the podcast. So next edition, as I said, I want to talk about internodes and genetics. It sounds pretty dry, but it won't be. I promise it'll be something that you'll get something out of. hopefully get a little bit of something out of every podcast. That's why I try and split it up into different sections, because some will hit the mark and others will miss the mark. But overall, hopefully this keeps taking everybody in the right direction, because that's what I want. I really love hearing terminology like, Bonsai Love or Happy Bonsai, or, give him a cuddle for me, because it's word spreading. There's a lot of bonsai love out there, and anyone listening, hopefully you're spreading it, because it's the best kind of love we can have. So as always, keep going. Watch out for any changes in your trees at this time of year. Look at harnessing and looking at making decisions Really, really don't let it slip past. If you're in spring, or even if you're going to autumn in the Northern Hemisphere, you've still got a lot of work to do. Autumn's a really busy time. Feeding started. I'm putting fertilizer bags on all of my trees. I've been out there giving them the seaweed tonic, the sea sol as well, not sea salt, sea sol, and really trying to get them as strong as I possibly can. Strong trees don't get damaged by the pest, which is the ultimate aim. So, as always, until next time, keep tracking forward. Keep on the path for your plan, and make sure you get out there and spend time with your trees. And happy bonsai.